more concerns in terms of compatibility with freedom of expression in the years to come. But it's interesting to see how most of the measures taken by these platforms engage with the infrastructure, they engage with the algorithms, they engage with the ways in which technology creates this risk, they engage with bots, algorithms, which is something that public authorities are struggling to do at the moment. In part also because, again, we lack the necessary legal frameworks, legal principles to engage with bots and algorithms from a perspective of freedom of expression. Again, some broad brush measures have been suggested in political parlance rather than legal measures in the last few months, such as prohibiting the use of automated bots, prohibiting the use of algorithms to spread this type of information. It's easier to say than to do, really. If we think to how automation is becoming essential to journalistic professions, to the news industry in these days, automated journalism, algorithmic journalism offers possibilities for the new industry to increase its coverage, and then preciseness, to avoid bias. It really increases the possibilities for good and rich journalism to an extent that it's difficult to foresee at the moment. Algorithmic journalism is not just fake news, and there is a conversation is happening at the moment. In little time in the future, we will be likely speaking of bots and algorithms freedom of expression, whether they should be protected in ways that human speech is also protected. So broad brush measures from the legal perspective that just operate on the agent side or on the creation of the message are difficult at the moment because of the fast pace at which technology changes. And for the difficulty to adapt existing principles to these brand new opportunities that technology offers, what is happening is that law and policy are being reactive to the problem, and they're only operating on the downside elements on the downstream elements of both the production chain, the phases of disinformation, and of the elements that constitute disinformation. Infrastructure, agent, creation are being left to the private sector at the moment. And this is unlikely to continue in the same way in the next few years. So one way to conclude this presentation, really, it's a presentation with more questions than firm conclusions here, I am afraid. But this is a pretty unstable, or it seems to be a pretty unstable moment, a pretty unstable model at the moment. And in the years to come, in the months to come, it's most likely that we will see frictions between the private sector-led initiatives and public sector-led initiatives on the side of intervening of agent and creation. I think this is me pretty much.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
I think we still have 15, maybe 20 minutes for a discussion. Any questions? Comments? Josh?
Really enjoyed the presentation, but to me this was screaming out from the start, the idea that it's all about the content, not the agents. And some of the things you said later on reminded me a lot of just corporate regulation in general and the struggles that we have in the sense of it always being reactive and always being, at the most, basically aimed at ensuring that if something really bad happens at the end, like public order is disrupted by so much misinformation, that we then have a remedy for that. And then that's the way we get to the agent, is through disaster happening, and then it's a little bit like, corporations operating in developing countries and screwing things up so badly that then we can finally have a case against them in an American court that might get us somewhere type of thing. But this doesn't seem to be very clearly doesn't seem to be a good way of going about things.
No.
But I mean, it suits a neoliberal rationale of clear distinction between the public and the private sector, and as most freedoms possible for the private sector to develop their different mediums and their different technologies and so forth, and drive innovation, etc. But in terms of the public good, which obviously is a decent debate about stuff that is important that we need to make decisions on, it's a disaster. Well, one thing I was wondering about was whether it's worth thinking in terms of consumption of information. So in the same way as we think of consumer foods or other things that when we have consumer rights and the idea of producing some sort of regulation on the agents in particular for producing something that is unhealthy for the public through consumer rights and the consumption. So we could think of the consumption of information in the same way as we think of the consumption of milk. The agent, the milk producer, must certify that they can produce milk in a proper manner before they can then sell milk on the market. Why can't we have some sort of a system that tries to ensure that an agent that is producing information produces it in such a manner that it's relatively healthy to the public? I'm sure they can produce stuff that might not be healthy for the public, and that's up to the public to decide whether it wants to consume it or not. But there is some sort of expectation around it. This is what we seem to be missing. There doesn't seem to be any newspapers obviously had fact check to a certain degree, but like I said before, that was really loose sort of a regulation.
I like the idea of this consumer protection side. In fact, another traditional stream of the ways in which courts engage with the notion of falsity and truthfulness has been both in the US and in Europe, banning tobacco advertisement. Especially when there are decisions, especially from a faraway past in which advertising tobacco was much more acceptable in society. Decisions have there's a wealth of decisions that declare that false advertisements that misleads the consumers on the effects of tobacco do not deserve protection.
Which is an interesting case because it brings you back to what you were saying before. Science on tobacco, in the same way as the science on
So again, I struggle to bring it under the same umbrella because there we have the backing of, this time it's really hard scientific evidence that tobacco and alcohol have detrimental effects for health.
So,
just tobacco, not alcohol, of course. Yes.
So advertising is commercial speech, right? So
Yeah.
struggling to see the relevance. Again, this is the quagmire of the Fifth Amendment jurisprudence that you referred to. There's absolutely no analogy.
Yes.
This is any case. And the contest, even to get that done, was so extended and prolix and incomplete. And, we could go into that. But it seems to me profoundly unlikely that, the idea that a state would set up something called a psychological defense authority, which would then have health regulations over political discourse, seems to me slightly planet Pluto. The other thing is that a quick Google search on Facebook abuses its critics, including when Parliament is trying to hold it accountable, is completely absent from that agent part. So, this is an ongoing happening thing, right? If regulators try to do stuff around Facebook's commercial imperatives, which are driving things. So I guess that what that leads to is a question about what technology does for your taxonomy. So one big thing, the next election, the next US presidential election, 2020, is going to be for on stuff. You mentioned cases where in one of your jurisdictions, stuff that reaches 5,000 users is going to be treated like public communication. Well, so the problem already is stuff that reaches one person right? So there's no public indication that I am spamming you through Facebook with something that's completely fabricated, where Hillary Clinton is involved in bestiality. And now the point is, there's no indication that I sent that to you. You are going to act on that proposal. I'm just not sure that sovereign data regulation is even going to touch sides. First of all, because Facebook is, the person who runs the platform is already known to be perpetrating misdeeds. And secondly, because there's no public indication of what you're doing.
Okay, so again, thank you very much. It's very, it also includes a number of different points and questions. I try to address them in order. It is true that the example of the alcohol and tobacco regulation we mentioned before belongs to the realm of commercial speech. This is also why I didn't include it here. It's also true, though, that different categories are not necessarily set in stone, and there is an element of fluidity between them. In this very moment, in this very month, and as part of this conversation, the category of political advertisement is being questioned, whether or not it belongs to political speech or to commercial speech, and especially whether or not platforms should be allowed to carry political advertisement. But then what does it mean? What is political advertisement, and how, especially in the context of platforms that carry short boxes of text, Twitter, Facebook, how easy it is to apply the traditional categories of political speech and political advertisement, and how easily distinguishable they are. Because of this difficulty to engage with the category of political advertisement, a completely different mechanism that some states are trying to implement, including the US, is to provide by law transparency for advertisement revenues and funds. So requesting that each platform reveals what political forces are behind the revenue streams. And that's a different for, I think, in what you said, you engage with questions of transparency and understanding the whole process. That's a different path that some states are going down to. But definitely, transparency of revenues is also something. Transparency of revenues, especially when it comes to political advertisement and political content, it's something that a few states are trying to implement at the moment. Technology, yes, I think this is also an example of how technology changes pre-existing frameworks and pre-existing ways in which we understand reality. I think one underlying issue in your question that it's different to see, it's difficult to understand what is public and what is a public means for communication, what is a private means for communication. That is definitely a trend taking place at the moment in regulatory measures, and so there's less and less of a distinction. If you want, this is also a conversation, it's happening in the public sphere at the moment, but here are just a few examples of calls from different quarters, the US, the UK, Europe, left wing, right wing, calls for platforms to be regulated tantamount to publishers or media. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? It's difficult to see. The proportionality of all measures is perhaps the key. In a sense, this is consistent with the trend of technological neutrality in regulation of communications and media. It has been going on for at least a couple of decades now. And also the idea that journalism is a function, it's not a profession. And anyone who engages with public communication, whether it's an NGO, a professional journalist, a blogger, a citizen journalist, whatever, deserves the same protection because they are implementing the same function. Now, what we're saying is that not only they deserve the same protection, they also need to abide by the same expectations and rules and standards, which is perhaps slightly more difficult. But this is definitely part of a trend of technological neutrality and focus on the function rather than the qualification that's been going on for a while now.
Because I think the other way is when you focus on the content, you're always going to go back to these free speech arguments, like the ones from 1644. that, like you say now, a lot of the people will, so there'll be more people who disagree or see it as sort of a mythological argument, but it's still there, it still makes sense to everybody. So while the thoughts and the sort of regulatory impulses are all sort of based on the content itself, this kind of is this quagmire that we keep hearing about that is going to be unavoidable. To me, the only way is to focus on the agents.
I was just really, thanks so much for really interesting paper, and in such a topical area, and you're kind of, trying to stay on top of so much global stuff happening so quickly. And one of the things that I was wondering about was kind of the interstate relationship element of the law and policies that are evolving. And in terms of, as a layperson, it kind of comes across that Russia, North Korea, there are a handful of kind of seemingly malevolent forces who are driving, a lot of the fake news with agendas to, I don't know, for chaos or whatever the agenda is. And it's just kind of both interesting and slightly perplexing to see, no explicit reaction to that from those worst affected in terms of what the response is. It seems that the response is as if, there are these nameless, faceless kind of people out there doing this, companies or possibly as well as individuals, but I was just wondering whether there's any kind of sense, either implicit in the laws or more explicitly in discussions maybe behind the laws, of that element of the problem, that there seems to be state perpetrators here.
This is very interesting, and I'm afraid there's not. Again, this is a problem that originates far away in time with the advent of the internet, really, and globalization of communications. And one of the main byproducts of globalization of technologies and communications that perhaps we all struggled to understand at the time, or at least the scope of the change, was the loss of information sovereignty. Back in the day, until not long ago, states were capable of controlling the narratives within their own boundaries through licensing laws for the press, through public service broadcasters, which were prominent in each state's public sphere. And now all of this is gone because of the advent of the internet, because of the lack of effectiveness of licensing measures. Back in the day, states needed to license broadcasters, and so they could decide, not the content, but they could decide who would speak to the citizens. And now with the internet, online radios, online TV, global websites, it's impossible for any state authority to control who speaks to their citizens. I know when I use this vocabulary, it feels a little bit like 1984. We don't need to frame it as a negative thing. It's always been part of any society, societal fabric, to provide the platform for the national conversation. But you know what they used to say, that the BBC was the way in which Britain would speak to itself. There is this element of the state obviously not engaging with the content of the information, but somehow providing the platform, providing the boundaries, engaging in what is called, loyalty. There's this book by Monroe Price, that at the end of the day, the media market is a market for loyalty. Because what's within the public sphere determines the loyalty, the allegiance of the public to the state, to the society. And all of this is gone. All of this is gone, it's a technological change more than anything else. And there's no laws for this. There's a lot of conversation at the moment on propaganda. Computational propaganda, digital propaganda, call it whatever you want. The fact is, propaganda is regulated at the international level. We do have provisions for propaganda for hatred, propaganda for war, which is nothing like what's happening now. the possibilities that the sovereign state could influence the outcome of an election, well, they were there already, of course. The influence of the US on global politics has always been there. Perhaps we failed to see it because we were on the same side, in a sense. On the other way around, it's now much more granular, much more widespread than it was before, because technology has taken away what was called information sovereignty from states. There's just no legal frameworks for this at the moment. This is why when I tried to engage before with the element of proportionality and the fact that decision makers at the global, at the international level would expect state authorities to demonstrate the specific harm. One of the difficulties is that this harm is very volatile at the moment, difficult to demonstrate, difficult to define. That we have legal frameworks to counter propaganda for war, propaganda for hatred. What's the inherent risk behind these types of propaganda? War, hatred. What is the inherent risk between this amount of disinformation we're saying today, that Donald Trump would win, that Brexit happens? It's difficult to define and to determine. This is why I agree with you, regulation of the agent is important. And it's something we find it difficult to conceive, to come up with a logical framework in the first place. Same thing, we struggle to come up with a logical framework to determine what is the harm that is taking place. But these are all...
That's because we're liberal.
Thank God.
We're all liberals and we all want to be able to say whatever they
Who's
want.
the agent in your framework?
Well, the Council of Europe, the agent changes depending on the context. The agent can be different in each phase. The agent is whoever the agent is whoever activates, whoever makes the action that kickstarts the process in each phase. You can be the agent, for instance, in the case of redistribution, by reposting stuff on your social networks and saying myself, everyone. Then the agent can be a troll factory in Russia. The agent can be, or in Portugal, not to put anyone under the spotlight. The agent can be the media outlet that fails to realize that the story is false and spreads it in the public sphere. So I reckon when we say the agent, again, it's not even a category. It's just the initiator behind any action that contributes to the circulation of fake news, of disinformation. In many cases, not even an existing person. It can be a bot, it can be an algorithm, but agent is basically whatever initiates this action.
So what work is the category of agent doing in your framework? How does it help us get a grip of any kind on this issue?
How does it help us to get, I think it helps us in by exclusion, pretty much. So we understand that behind any act of disinformation, making it into the public sphere, we have someone or something that initiates it. We have a message that travels through the interpreter. This is the theoretical framework. If we look at it, we see that the law and the policy don't kick in until the moment when the message is being crafted. It's out there. The law kicks in the moment something is being produced, something is being packaged as a media message, or it's being spread to the audience. Back in the day, when the only people capable of engaging in public communication were professional journalists, there were rules for the creation. And they were, by and large, self-regulatory measures. There were codes of conduct, professional codes, so on and so forth. They regulated the creation of the message, and there was a clear understanding of who was the agent bound to the respect of these rules. These two elements now are largely gone. So the way in which this category helps us is by demonstrating how volatile, fluid the category has become and why laws struggle to tackle on it. Because we come from a world where we had a clear idea of who the agent was, how creation happened, what were the rules that applied to the agent for the creation. This first element is completely wiped out by changes in the technology and in the industry. And so all that is left to our lawmakers and policymakers is to engage with the other two elements and with the other two phases, leaving the industry, leaving the platforms to self-regulate themselves. Again, this is somehow consistent with the historical mindset. Who produces new content? News companies, journalists. Journalists will regulate themselves. The creation is regulated by journalistic codes of conduct. Who is at the center of it now? Platforms. Platforms will regulate themselves. It's not the same because it takes non-professionals under the same umbrella, because we outsource it to private entities, because they have power to stifle individual speech to an extent that traditional self-regulation of journalism didn't have. So it's a complete, in a sense, by applying the same mindset, there is a complete change of scenario here, which raises concerns for freedom of expression, for censorship, and so on.
I think I'm mindful of time, and maybe we can thank Paolo again for this wonderful presentation, and maybe think about this issue. Thank you very much.